Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Deirdre McGeehan. I am a professor of urban studies here at the Levin College, and it is my great pleasure today to welcome you on behalf of our dean, Roland Anglin, and the entire college community to this forum on your neighbor, refugees as your neighbor, and to extend a special welcome to the Refugee Services Collaborative. This is one of a number of what we call Dean's Dialogues and forums, and as befitting our mission as a college, we are very pleased to have forums that focus on very pertinent and contemporary issues of policy that involve the community and the city of Cleveland and the greater Cleveland area and the Northeast Ohio. This really speaks to our outreach and the engagement that we pride ourselves in the college, and so we're really excited about this forum and very interested in hearing what's going on. I mentioned I was a professor here. I'm also, you can probably tell from my accent, I am an immigrant. Not quite a refugee, although I did leave war-torn Belfast, which almost qualified me, but this is also an area I have a great interest in as I've researched migration all my life. So just like you, I'm looking forward to a very exciting panel and speech, and it's my great pleasure now to hand this over to Janice Small, who will facilitate the proceedings. Thank you again.
Thank you, Deirdre. Thank you to CSU. Thank you to Dean Anglin. We're so sorry he couldn't be with us today. I'm Janice Small, and I am pleased to be facilitating the beginning of today's session. And I'm very pleased to have had the honor of working with the Refugee Services Collaborative since its onset back in 2011. I personally had been working with Dean Anglin on a variety of projects, and I said to him one day, you know, you might be interested in this Refugee Services Collaborative. And he said, interested? I need to meet with them. I need to learn more. As I'm learning about Cleveland, I need to learn more about refugees, where they live, how they got there, how they're impacting our communities, how our communities are welcoming them and helping them. And he said, bring me some of the RSC leaders. So several of us went and met with him, and 5 minutes in, he said, this is such important information for our students, for our faculty. The place that refugees do hold and can hold to enrich our communities is so very important. Will you do a forum with us? And this is just one of the many ideas that he had to help the students and the faculty and everybody here and beyond and out in the broad community learn more so everyone can welcome and benefit from the richness that having refugees here brings. So we thank you all for making this happen. What we are doing today, this first Refugee is Your Neighbor forum that's presented by the Levin College of Urban Affairs in partnership with the RSC, is to give you, our audience, some firsthand understanding of life as a refugee here in Greater Cleveland. So you're going to be hearing directly from a number of individuals who came here as refugees, learn from them both in person and through some documentaries that the RSC, Refugee Services Collaborative, has been able to commission by local artists and filmmakers over the years, thanks to the ongoing support from the Community West Foundation. So first thing, we want you to learn from refugees. Next, we're going to be providing you with what we always call Refugee 101. Just what is a refugee? What is an immigrant? What is a refugee? How does the refugee resettlement process work? Some straightforward facts, and then a panel of individuals who are very involved in refugee resettlement in one of a variety of ways, which will be beautifully facilitated by David Dombrowiak from the Community West Foundation. So the RSC, as I mentioned, came together in 2011. A group of refugee serving organizations came together to explore who's doing what, where might there be duplication, where might there be gaps in services. And through that process of exploration, these organizations said, you know, this is good. This talking together is a really good thing, and together we want to make Cleveland the best place. Help me, guys. Is it in the country or in the world? for refugees to be resettled. Definitely in the country and maybe beyond for refugees to be resettled. So the RSC, Pam, where are the brochures? Are the brochures over by Megan over there? So we hope you pick up brochures about the RSC and about the member organizations before you leave today, and you'll hear more from me about how you might be able to get involved. But again, what we're going to do first today is to hear from Lydia Baguma and Khoon Thomas Kate, how they came to Cleveland, what their journey has been like, and after that, I'll be back up here just to give you a little bit of intro to some of the documentaries that I mentioned to you that will be screening for you, and you'll meet other refugees right here in Cleveland otherwise in that vehicle. So Lydia and Thomas, come on up.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me today to share the story about the refugee experiences. And thank you for Janet introduce about myself, so I will now introduce myself again. So let's start with the slide. Today I'm going to talk about the why. The why was for the country. It is called Burma. One time is called, right now it's known as Myanmar. So Myanmar is situated in Asia, East Asia. So more specific, it is in Southeast Asia, a small country, this one. And in Myanmar, there are 7 divisions and 7 states. And the 7 states belong to the native or the ethnic city in Burma. There are a lot of minority or tribes inside Burma, but major ethnicity, we have 8 of them. And the why was for the small state called Karenni, the one that is shown in the map, the small one. And in Karenni state, again, you will see 5 of the districts, and the whites came from the blue district. It is south of the Karenni state. And the Karen tribe is called, the white tribes is called Baku. They speak the language similar to the other one, Karen, but they recognize himself as the Karenni. And this is the village. When you look at the district, the blue district before, and the village, the first picture is the Google map. The whole area called Mochi is very famous in Burma because one, it was built, British built the mining industry in there, and still today it's running mining program in there. And the area is also famous because of the fighting. The Soviet War happened in the area. People kill each other, the regular Karenni fighting each other. And the second picture is a real picture of the location. And you can see the first picture at the small triangle yellow one, it is the white village. The white live in the small village. There are about 20 households, and the whole village relies on bamboos. Bamboo is the main sources for the village. They build the house, they build the plates, spoon. We do not buy it from the outside. We use everything to eat inside the bamboo. And the most important, we use the bamboo as irrigation. We carry water from the stream to the village. And the house, this is how the village the boy live in. And generally, people on Karen or Karen people live in the village peacefully. They grow vegetables, they grow paddies. So the main produce that we grow is paddy, the rice. And we rely on nature. We pick a vegetable from nature, and Karen people live peacefully, support each other, and they avoid the conflicts as much as possible, and having very simple meat each day. And the boy lived with the parents in the village, and when he was 12 years old, both of the parents passed away. But he lived with the siblings. The siblings took care of him. And in the village, so he was born as a victim of the Civil Wars. So we see them here. The Civil War started after British give independence to Burma, 1948. All the other states fight it because the Burmese majority do not keep their promise to give their independence or self-determination to the other ethnic city. So that's what all fighting around this area. That is why the boy was born as the victim of Civil War. And in 1996, the boy was in earthly hell. Why? Because one day, the Burmese soldier came to the village, and forced all the village to relocate close to the Burmese military camp. And anyone who refused or didn't want to go, they shot and killed everyone in the village. But during the relocation process, some of the villagers escaped. You can see this picture here, fleeing to nowhere. They just escaped to go anywhere. They don't want to go to Burmese relocation camp. I call it concentration camp. Why? Because living in concentration camp, a Burmese military camp, the boy has to work for Burmese. So before after they relocate everybody and some people escape, the Burmese loot all the belongings, confiscated the land, and they burn the houses to the ground. And no one can go back to the village. After then, they put landmine inside the village. And this is the people who escaped. Some people who escaped from the relocation, they live in the jungle for many years before they get just interned to refugee camp, or it's called temporary shelter in Thailand. So living in the refugee camp, living in the military camp, the boy have to work for Burmese soldier every day, such as cooking, carry water, cleaning military camp. And one day, it was very, very sad, and it was unfortunately one of the boy's friend, his friend stamped or landmine and passed away in front of him. And the boy said, "No, I cannot stay here." He doesn't want to stay at the camp anymore, and he tried to escape. The next day, early morning, with many friends, there are total 30 people, including children. So after he escaped, the same thing, he have nowhere to go, just escape from the military camp. And all the way, traveling for a month, buy food from the relocation camp to anywhere to the border, and they finally got into the refugee camp. But before they got refugee camp, on the way, one of the children got malaria. They don't have any medication, no doctor, so one of the children passed away. And finally, in 1998, the whites arrived in refugee camp. So the boy's name is Khoon, known by Pobledo. And living in refugee camp for 12 years. So it is me. I lived in refugee camp for 12 years. I got a chance to study at the Bangkok, capital of Thailand, to study philosophy, politics, and economy. And after that, I got married. I have 2 daughters at that time, but right now I have 3 children, 1 boy and 2 girls. And living in the camp, I work as teacher, CAT administration, and also do some interpretation stuff for the US government. And this is the refugee life. So living in a refugee camp in 2009, many countries, the Scandinavia, Australia, New Zealand, America, opened the door for refugee. Because the many refugees in Thailand crowded, people are moving in more and more, and Thai government said, "I cannot accept it anymore." That is why the government of US, Australia, Scandinavia said, if you want to go to third country, we open it for you. And me and my family, we decided to move to the United States because I studied GED, I know about US. I want to come here and compare the other country. I feel like it is a land of opportunity. That is why the whole family accept to come here. In 2010, October, I applied for it in 2009. It takes 1 year to graduate me to come to United States. And after 1 year, I was granted. So the agency called International Rescue Committee resettled us to US, and I landed in New York 2010. I lived in New York for 4 months, working as a caseworker, living in there. And New York City is a crazy city. I live in the Bronx, but I have to travel to Manhattan. On the way, I see a lot of crazy. I'm scared. My children are scared. And my wife said, "Don't want to stay here." Fortunately, I got chance. So you see, I moved out to Cleveland in February, and I work as program coordinator, board member of the Refugee Response 6 there until 2016. Right now, scholarship program and adult tutoring coordinator. Why I moved here? You see the first picture of the 2 guys, the founder of Refugee Response, Paul Nadufer and David Wallace, was my professor when I was in the capital of Thailand. I studied philosophy, politics, and one of them, we met. We know each other. We shared a story. So when I got New York, he said, "Come down here." I came here, and that's why I moved out to Cleveland. When I moved here, I work at refugee. I work at the farm. I work at the tutor. I working with many students, the parents, interpreter, and also advocator for the refugee. And this is my work when I work with the refugee response. And living in here after 5 years, I tried to get the first dream that I came to United States, I got and become citizen of the United States in February 19, 2016 through naturalization tax. So this is when I was graduate. I'm very proud to be United States here because I got chance to practice my right, basic right to vote. So after I became citizen, the first time I got to vote as well at the end of 2016, November. So I'm very proud. So right now, I'm working as the refugee response as program coordinator of scholarship and adult tutoring. Besides that, I'm also working with the church, and I'm general secretary of the church called Cleveland Collaborative Church. There are about 100 members and about 40 households in Lakewood area. So this is all the picture that I work and I participate. Thank you.
Thomas, thank you from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of all of us from the RSC, and I know everybody in the audience today. It was wonderful. And now Lydia. Lydia will join us up here. And Lydia Baguma is a refugee who was born in the Democratic Republic of Congo and fled to Uganda in 2003, so 16 years ago, due to war and violence. She was resettled in the United States in November of 2018, so not very long ago. So glad you're here in Cleveland with us, and glad you're here with us today. Lydia lives in Cleveland. She works full-time at St. Augustine Health Campus as a personal aide to elderly adults. Lydia has a bachelor's degree in human rights, peace, and humanitarian interventions, and Lydia also has a law degree. She previously worked for the International Organization for Migration, the Waiakati Foundation, and with Barnabas and Sons Law Firm. We're very happy you're here in Cleveland with us, and we're grateful you're here with us today and that you're going to share your story, Lydia. So thank you.
Good evening to you all. I'm very happy to be here this evening, and I want to thank you so much for the passion you have for refugees and for the love that you have shared to us. We're very grateful. On behalf of refugees, I really appreciate everyone that puts a hand into helping these people. You're doing a very good job. I was born in Congo in 1996, not so long ago, so I'm very young. And I migrated to Uganda as a refugee in 2003, together with my family, a family of 10, due to insecurities and unsafe environment. We lived a peaceful life in Congo until we were evaded by rebels that were forcing people into, young boys into the army and violating young girls and women. And so my father felt it was unsafe for us, and so we had to move to Uganda. And then we thought maybe life would be better for us in Uganda until we had to face another truth. Life in Uganda for 16 years I lived was a struggle, I must say. We struggled so hard to go into school. We struggled so hard to get a living, to get shelter, to get clothes for ourselves, to make a life. And then my father put us in school, and then I got passion in human rights because I watched so much injustices. So right from my childhood, I dreamt of being a lawyer because I watched so much injustices, and I thought the only way I can help is advocate for those that can't speak for themselves. It was really hard to be a lawyer in a country that is not mine, you know. because there was so much, school was expensive and we didn't have the money for school. And then getting into school, getting enrolled in school was also a hard process for a refugee. But we tried our best. And then when I got into school, I tried to study through hardships. Paying tuition was a bit hard for my father. That the times I would miss school because of tuition, but would still keep believing that one day, I will make it. In 2018, we got into the resettlement process as a family. 2008. So from 2008 to 2018, we have been on resettlement process. Very long, discouraging, and we would keep in school. So while in school, I also tried to work for refugees because that's always been my passion. So I worked for Hope for Refugees in Action as an English teacher. So I was teaching refugees English so that they can get fit in the society and get jobs. And then I left the job and got another job in Wakati Foundation, and this was in Nachi Valley Refugee Settlement in Uganda. While in the settlement, we helped, I worked as an operations manager, and I used to help refugees learn hand-skilled jobs so they can get jobs easily, like tailoring, building, and so on. And then also teaching English, those that don't know English. But my experience in the refugee camp forced me to apply for a job in the United Nations, because I felt helping them while in the camp was just not enough, because the life they were experiencing was full of struggles, poverty. So I felt I should do more for the refugees to get them out of the camp. I tried to apply for the United Nations until I got admitted. I got employed as an operations manager in the immigration agency. While working as an operations manager, I felt it was a bit satisfying for me, because we would get these refugees from the camp and bring them to town and then give them accommodation in hotels, give them food and clothes until they can be resettled to all the countries they're going to go to. And then while working at IOM, I also did change from law to human rights. And then while in school, doing my human rights course, I tried to be the president of human rights. And in my term of office, I did charity work. It was satisfying for me to do charity work because I'm a refugee and I knew the struggle. I loved it when I would go visit people that were lacking shoes, clothes, and give them what they don't have, collecting material stuff and giving them out to the needy. And then I got resettled to the United States just 15th of November last year. And this was just the beginning of my transition. A good experience. I was received by my caseworker at Catholic Charities called Basel, and then he took me to my house. For 16 years of living in Uganda, we struggled with rent, we struggled with shelter, and then when I got a house for myself, I felt relieved. The very first thing I felt when I got to the United States was safety. I felt I'm in a safe environment, not like the environment I lived before. I didn't have to struggle to get to the United States. I had people waiting for me, and then gave me shelter, gave me something to eat, and then helped me get a job. Right now, I am working and earning and paying bills, which is a life transformation for me. Because much as I worked in Africa, it was a struggle, It is not a struggle anymore like it was before. Life struggles never cease, never stop, but at least there is struggling, and then in Africa, we would struggle a little harder than we're struggling right now. Right now, I'm looking forward to furthering my education in law because I dream of being an immigration lawyer. And I want to be an immigration lawyer because I still want to help refugees. Refugees, to me, helping a refugee is saving a life. Because someone saved my life, and I want to save life as well. It is, I know how it feels to be a refugee, I know how it feels to be in need, and that is why my passion has always been law. Because I feel it's the best field I can advocate for these people. And then Catholic Charities just gave me a good experience and taught me more about charity. You know, they took me into, they gave me a job, gave me a house. That is more of charity that I didn't know about. It is more than giving someone clothes, giving someone food to eat, helping them figure out their life. And the future to come is life indeed. It is giving someone life, you know. So I really thank so much Catholic Charities for the work they've done in my life. I miss my family and I hope they join me because I was split from them and they're still struggling in Africa. And I pray that one day they will come and join me. And I also look forward to working more and experiencing more of what life has to offer to me. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Mattei, and I am coming from Cleveland Catholic Charities Migration and Refugee Services. And today I will sort of be pairing the really beautiful, heartwarming stories with some facts specifically about refugees just in general. Some of you may be familiar with the terms that you're hearing, others may not be. So just so we can have a clarity of language and move from there. And then specifically what resettlement is in the greater Cleveland area and the country just in general. So first and foremost, what is a refugee? It's a person who has fled their country of origin and they're unable or unwilling to return based off of a well-founded fear of persecution or actual persecution. And it's based on one's race, their religion, their political opinion, nationality, or their social group. It was originally set forth in 1951, the definition itself, and it was a temporal and proximal definition. So you had to have been displaced prior to January 1st, 1951 in Europe in order to be given the status. If you weren't displaced in Europe prior to January 1st, 1951, you would not be considered a refugee. This protocol was expanded in 1967 to include other countries, sort of in the post-colonial fallout that really began to happen at that time. Under this mandate, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees sort of takes care of people within these camps. But to increase this clarity to make sure that we're using the proper language when we're talking about groups of people moving over borders, we have to bring up asylum seekers as well. And asylum seekers are people who have left their country and they feel as though they're being persecuted. They reach the port of entry to a country and they ask that country for asylum in it, which then kicks off a legal process that can take many, many years, and you must go through proceedings during that to get the government to agree with your argument that you have been persecuted from your country of origin. So it's a slightly different process. If you're granted asylum here in the United States, you'll be treated like a refugee who's been resettled, which is an important distinction. After that, we have an internally displaced definition. An internally displaced person is anyone who's been displaced, forcibly displaced from their habitual place of residence within their country. So we'll use the Yazidi people in Iraq. They were just north of Baghdad when ISIS ran their campaign of terror. They displaced the population of Yazidis who were living just north of the city, and they went further into the country. They weren't under the UNHCR's mandate, though, which is the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. It's pretty difficult to reach IDPs very often. Generally speaking, you flee further into a country, and if there is, persecution taking place and you haven't crossed that international border, you may be in a very serious situation where humanitarian aid can't reach you. And I didn't mention this either. Currently, there are 68.5 million forcibly displaced people worldwide. 19.9 million of that forcibly displaced are under the UNHCR's mandate of being a refugee. After that, with asylum seekers, we have 3.1 million worldwide. The largest number by far right now are internally displaced persons at 40 million, which is pretty staggering and the most since World War II, which is important to remember. And then finally, we have stateless persons, who are people who don't have a citizenship. They're not under the, when you're born into a country, you're granted citizenship. And there are certain things you become eligible because of that. In some states, we'll use the Nepali people who were living in Bhutan, citizenship can be stripped of you, and suddenly you have no state that can provide you a lot of the services that a state offers. And this puts many more people in precarious situations where they could be, subject to persecution and very vulnerable. All of that being said, we heard about these refugee experiences. I'll talk to you a little bit more about what the UNHCR offers people when they flee their country of origin. So when you flee, you go to a secondary country. It's generally a country that borders you. So we'll say you're in the Democratic Republic of Congo and you flee into Tanzania. When you go into Tanzania, border guards will stop you. You're then taken to a UN processing center and they will grant you the status. Depending on where you're from and the situation, you may be granted the status very quickly because they know a specific ethnic group is being persecuted. So we'll take care of people. The UNHCR knew a very specific population was being persecuted, so when you cross that border, they're able to grant that status very quickly. If it's a politically motivated situation, it gets more difficult, as you can imagine. In the camps, they're not the most hospitable of places. They are places where you will just survive. They provide tarp tents for people, very basic sanitation. You can see a well here with water. There isn't the infrastructure that you need to sustain 38,000 people living in a camp. There are some camps like Zatari refugee camp, which is in Jordan. It houses mostly Syrian refugees. It has about 80,000 people living in about 2 square miles. And to give you a comparison, Lakewood has about 50,000 people living in 5 square miles, which when you're thinking about those numbers, you cut Lakewood in half, add 30,000 more people, you're having the situation on the ground. The camps are often very dense. They're built very, kind of horizontally, and people are kind of smushed together, for lack thereof a better word. Diseases like tuberculosis are very common, and the situations are desperate. But they're not as desperate as staying in the place that you were originally in. It is a better life because you're there with your family and you try to wait it out. For a lot of these populations, and I'll talk about this road to resettlement in a moment, but to provide the full context of this, I need to mention a few more things. If you are under the UNHCR's mandate, you are offered 3 durable solutions if you're a refugee. The first is voluntarily repatriating back to your home country. That's ideal. People wrap themselves up in place. In Cleveland, you have designations about being from the east side or the west side, and that denotes something. I mean, when you go further out, you have geographical representations of where people are from, and that people tie their identity to that pretty strongly. So ideally, people can go back to their home country. There are times, though, that is not available. So there's a second solution, which is local integration, meaning you locally integrate into a secondary society. Some countries are able to do this. Some countries are unable. Some are willing. Some are unwilling. It just depends on where you end up. It really is dependent on the situation you're in. So in this situation, you have someone who's fled Bhutan, who's ethnically Nepali, and they go to Nepal. Nepal isn't able to suddenly take several 100,000 people fleeing into their country all at the exact same time. They corral them into camps, and one lives in a camp. What happens then when you have no other solution other than resettlement? We'll talk about that. But it's important to remember, of that 19.9 million who are considered refugees worldwide, last year about 100,000 were resettled to a third country. And 37 countries offer resettlement services worldwide. So we're talking about a very small subset of that total number, less than 1%. So keep that in mind. We're talking about subsets of numbers. The United States last year resettled about 22,000 refugees all over the United States. And to compare that, Brown Stadium houses about 70,000 people on any given weekend. So keep that in mind when we're talking about who is going to be resettled. So the path to resettlement looks very similar to this. You flee, you cross into a secondary country, and you are determined to be a refugee by the UNHCR. And you live in the camp. Sometimes it's a decade, sometimes it's 2 decades. It could be longer, it could be less. It just depends on your situation. If you are deemed a highly qualified candidate and you apply with the UN, you can be resettled to a 3rd country. You'll get bumped to one of the 37 countries that offers resettlement worldwide, the United States being one of them, and there's a decent likelihood that you would be resettled to the United States, just because, 22,000 out of 100,000, that's a pretty decent percentage. You'll then be screened by State Department contractors overseas, and it's a process that now takes a little bit over 36 months in order to complete. The barrier is quite high. Where the rubber really hits the road is when a Department of Homeland Security officer from the USCIS, which is the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, meets with you overseas, and they just ask you a battery of questions. They'll say, why did you flee? Who did you flee with? Were you a part of any, organizations that have run afoul with the government? I mean, probably not that verbose, but you get the idea. They ask you a series of questions, and then they'll ask you to come back in a few weeks later. And they ask you similar questions, or someone else will ask you similar questions to see if you're telling a consistent story the entire time. And that's really where they weed people out in this process. At this point, when they deem the screening sufficient, you will then be resettled to one of the affiliate sites in the United States. There are 9 different organizations across the United States that resettles people on behalf of the State Department. So when you're thinking about this from a much higher vantage point, you have the UNHCR, those 37 countries, the United States being one. The United States selects the refugees, vets them, approves them to be resettled, and then that work is done by individual refugee resettlement agencies. So it is a very long bureaucratic pipeline. That's important to remember when you're thinking about this because we're doing it on behalf of the government. You arrive in Cleveland, if you're lucky to arrive in Cleveland, the Refugee Services Collaborative of Greater Cleveland will, provide a quilt of different services for you. Our role in resettlement is to really execute what the State Department feels like is necessary to get someone on their feet. And it really depends on where you just end up. I've been using this example a lot recently. In southwestern Kentucky, there's a place called Garden City. In Garden City, there's a refugee resettlement agency. There's about 38,000 people who live in that area. You could end up there just by luck, unless you have a family member who lives somewhere else, or you could end up in Cleveland, or New York City, San Diego, etc. If you're at a smaller site like Garden City, you will ultimately go through a different process than you will here in Cleveland. But to that point, quite a few states, about 10 states, resettle a majority of the refugees across the United States, Ohio being one of them at about 4%. And like I mentioned, Brown Stadium has about 70,000 people who can fit into it. We are nationwide resettling around 22,000. It is important to note, though, in the past 75,000, 60,000, those are the numbers being allowed into the United States previously. I'm going to skip a couple slides and then go back to make this flow a little bit. Resettlement itself really starts prior to a family actually arriving. So the State Department, once the resettlement agencies, requires the resettlement agencies to find rental units for families. When these rental units are found, the basic items for survival will be moved into the house. So these are like beds, places to sit, lamps, no TVs, no washers or dryers, really the most basic items for survival into these places. The house should be outfitted prior to the family arriving, and when the family finally does arrive, a case manager from one of those resettlement agencies will pick you up from the airport. If you see in the very center of that picture on the left there, and you can actually see it on the right too, there are these bags, IOM, Lydia worked for them, the International Organization for Migration. Those bags contain everyone's vital documentation. They'll check that, it has their I-94, which is their alien number. They'll make sure everything checks out, and if everything checks out, they'll take the family back to the house that's been set up for them. There will be a ready-made meal there for them, so it's culturally appropriate, and their case management period for the next 30 to 90 days will begin. This is resettlement. So you pick them up from the airport, transport them there. Usually people are so tired, though, kids aren't jumping on the bed, everyone's so tired where you just completely pass out because you've been on the plane for hours and hours and hours. And you've been through New York or Chicago, and then you end up in Cleveland. If you end up in the middle of February, you can imagine. On the first day, the case manager will go back to the house, and they'll begin setting the stage for providing the necessary, most rudimentary aspects of life here in the United States. So that would be making sure people are applying for Social Security cards, getting state identification cards, going through health screenings, etc. One of the collaborative members, Neighborhood Family Practices, where refugees ultimately get their health screenings. On day 7, you'll begin applying for these things. Refugees are eligible to receive these services because you can imagine everything's front-loaded. You go through all that screening, they want you to get started as quickly as possible. That's the way the government is viewing this. You'll get SNAP benefits, so food stamps. After the health screenings, kids will be enrolled in schools, either at Lakewood City Schools, which is another member of the Refugee Services Collaborative, or the Cleveland Metropolitan School District at Thomas Jefferson International Newcomers Academy. A lot happens within this first 30 days, but it's pretty overwhelming, as you can imagine. Adults will be enrolled in ESL classes, generally taught by Aspire teachers or at the Hope Center with Building Hope in the City, another collaborative member. The ESL classes generally is related to employment training. The key word that everyone uses is self-sufficiency, I guess the key words. The idea is that you can stand on your own 2 feet by the end of all of this and start. But once again, if you end up in a place like Garden City, this 30 days is potentially all that's offered to you within this. So when we talk about Cleveland being unique within the country, it's because these services continue on, because otherwise you are on your own, which, if that sounds daunting, it's because it is. Kids will be registered for school, like I mentioned, Lakewood and the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. Previously, Cleveland Heights and University Heights School District, but less so now. At day 30, what the case manager will do if all these steps are complete, and generally it bumps out to 90 because if you have 7 kids, suddenly health screenings become much more difficult. If somebody gets sick or if they miss one, things just end up getting bumped back. The case manager will potentially check in on the family and close them out. But like I said, oftentimes this is bumped out to 90 days. During this period too, all the refugees will receive a cultural orientation, which is a basic introduction to what life will be like here in Cleveland, which you might intellectually understand, but there's really no way to prepare yourself for these elements once things get going, just because, like the air show, for example. How do you really prepare for the air show come Labor Day? Suddenly these planes are going up above head, making a bunch of noise, and you're like, what is this? And, depending on the situation you come from, that could bring back some very terrible memories. Or parent-teacher conferences, or the Selective Service Act. There's these small elements that begin to just emerge occasionally that are representative of our culture, and you're told about during that cultural orientation, but it doesn't necessarily mean you can remember all that. I feel overwhelmed when I'm sitting in it myself. Self-sufficiency really is the goal, though, through this resettlement process. And in Cleveland, as Janice mentioned, it is a model for the rest of the country. And to bump back a couple of slides so I can make this flow a little bit better. I should have reorganized these. The organizations, the service organizations that provide these resettlement services and the additional wraparound services contributed $2.7 million back to the state of Ohio in 2016, according to the 2017 economic impact study done by the it's Chimera and Associates through the or not through, but commissioned by the Refugee Services Collaborative. 11 million has been invested resulting in 63.5 million in economic activity in the Cleveland area because of these jobs that refugees have, taken. 663. It's no number to balk at. Mind you, too, this was during a time when there were more refugees coming in, but these numbers do speak for themselves. There is a net positive for, having refugees, be resettled just in general. To jump back forward, I apologize for not reorganizing that. Refugees do hold a unique status, and asylum seekers can get this once they receive the status. They're fully authorized to work and live in the United States. And they are effectively on a track for first their green card. After a year, you can apply And then after 5 years, you are able to apply for your naturalization. And if you have children under the age of 18, they can get derivative citizenship once parents pass that test, which is pretty cool. Always keep in mind we're talking about a very slim minority of refugees who are being resettled, though. And many still are in camps as we speak and will continue to be. And you think of places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, Somalia, Bhutan. These are protracted situations that have been going on for decades. And I just named 3. Many more are also going through that situation as well. So when you are being resettled, you're issued a travel loan by the IOM. You must pay that back within 5 years after your initial date of resettlement, which, that's a lot of money. They don't charge interest on it or anything like that. You do just pay back the bill, but you do come here in the hole. It's not as though you're coming with a free ride or anything like that. You need to start working, otherwise the bills will start to collect. When you're coming in, the State Department kind of flags a bunch of money for a refugee, so this would include with rental assistance, this would include the items for the house, this would include a little bit of pocket cash. It's not that much per family, and like I said, the government is assuming after that 30 to 90 days, you will be good to go. What we do here, though, is offer services far beyond that in order for people to really thrive as opposed to kind of, drift in the place that they're in. Garden City, though, to be fair, they've had resettlement going on for many years, and it's pretty a part of the community. They had a lot of Vietnamese come in the 1980s, so they're good at addressing it, but their services have been reduced to a large extent, which I think we might touch on a little bit later after this. I keep mentioning the different service organizations within the Refugee Services Collaborative. It really does provide a quilt of different organizations for refugees to tap into should they need them. We have the 3 resettlement agencies, us together, the United States Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, and Catholic Charities, Diocese of Cleveland Migration and Refugee Services. This includes Cuyahoga County, and then we have funders including the Community West Foundation. There are a series of organizations within the Cleveland area that are actively making I think, being thought leaders as far as what resettlements should look like here in the United States. Many countries do it a little bit differently. So Canada, you have groups of families that will work with or groups of Canadian families that will work with a new family that came in. The United States really wants you to get going really quickly. The way we approach it, though, is I think providing a holistic set of services for refugees who have been resettled in the area. And I think the outcomes are pretty positive. Specifically from those economic impact studies. We can open it up for questions now. I think hopefully I haven't bored you all too much. Does anyone? Yes, yeah.
What sort of, lobbying services are possible from local resettlement groups to broader resettlement agencies or even to the U.S. State Department?
So ultimately, it comes down. So, for example, we're affiliated with the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. We are one of 50 affiliate sites all across the United States. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops they have offices in Washington, D.C., and they advocate for certain policy decisions based on this. It's really trying to convince. You can put pressure on legislators or legislators in your area, but really, the decision ultimately comes down to the executive branch of government. Historically, since Ronald Reagan, George Bush, Bill Clinton, many presidents have been pretty open towards refugee resettlement just in general, but they can set that number wherever they'd like. And it can be at their will. You could have broad popular support, but if the executive branch doesn't want to increase the number, they don't need to. So I think controlling the narrative is pretty important. Using the correct words when you're talking about specific populations is a start. There is a tremendous amount of misinformation, though. Generally speaking, if you're born in the United States, you never have to think about immigration at all as far as approach. most people probably don't know what an N400 is, or like a T visa. You know what I mean? These are things that we don't need to think about as citizens, so it's sort of an alien concept when you're thinking about this. But I think being informed, talking about it with clarity, and then, you know, you can still pressure local, you know, lawmakers who can then pressure their party, for example. I mean, that's a start, but the executive branch of government does have full control over that, and they can set the policy as they wish. I hope that answers okay. But I would say, as far as advocacy goes, you can still pressure local lawmakers.
Has there been a reduction by the executive branch in the number of refugees that can come in?
Yes, so starting in fiscal year 2017, which went from October 2016 to September 2017, the Obama administration originally set the ceiling for the number of refugees that could be allowed into the country at 110,000. When the Trump administration took power in January, they reduced the cap to 50,000. The number had almost been reached, so only a few thousand more refugees were resettled that year. The Trump administration the following year, in fiscal year 2018, so October 2017 to September 2018, set the bar at 45,000. Only about 23,000 nationwide were resettled, though, so they were quite a bit under the bar. In the current year, the fiscal year we're in, the bar has been set at 25,000 to be resettled in the United States. So there's been a large dip. The only other significant dip in the past was right after 9/11, and then the numbers increased again. Yeah. Yes?
Are there specific countries that the refugees who are coming to Cleveland tend to come from, as well as are there certain areas within Cleveland that are being resettled to?
So, yes, right now, primarily Congolese refugees are being resettled. In the previous year, it was refugees from the Democratic Republic of Congo and Bhutan, followed by Ukrainian. This year, it's almost exclusively been Congolese refugees from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And most refugees are resettled on the west side of Cleveland, close to transportation corridors. It's like 26, the 22. These are buses that are pretty reliable as far as transportation goes. The rent's pretty affordable. It's pretty safe. I mean, these are the areas that are primarily being resettled. And I think almost, I believe Us Together just moved downtown, and USCRI is now in the Clark-Fulton area. A lot of the organizations are located either very close to downtown or on the west side. So that's also a factor as well. And like in the schools too, when you factor that in, neighborhood family practice. I mean, when you think about the Hope Center, all of these things are on the west side of Cleveland. A lot of the infrastructure is built up around that. So I could probably think of even more if I was given a chance. Any other questions? Well, thank you all. And if you can remember two words, fled as the noun or fled as the verb and persecution as the noun, that is the operative definition of what a refugee is. If you can keep those in your mind, you will never forget. So, thank you.
Andy, thank you. That was not boring at all. That was outstanding. Fled and persecution is very helpful. I get to do something now that I have always wanted the chance to do, David. I've never got to be the one to introduce David. If godmother is a good term, godfather sometimes, doesn't have that, whatever the wonderful term is, David has been there for refugees in Cleveland, for the Refugee Services Collaborative, in a humble way, because he truly believes in this in his heart and soul, and that's going to come through. All of us at the RSC, especially me, have been honored to be working with David and see this come alive in him. And he is definitely a person that walks the talk, talks the walk, puts his money where his mouth is, all those kinds of things, which is rare to see at that level in a very well-respected funder. I'll tell you, David Dombrowiak has been the president and CEO of the Community West Foundation for almost 20 years now. During his tenure, David has worked tirelessly to change the focus of the foundation to work on serving the least of our brothers and sisters. The least of our brothers and sisters and refugees has been a very important part of that. David has been honored by many local leaders and organizations for his work, right on up to the U.S. Senate and the White House. David has 2 degrees in philosophy, and he has studied medical bioethics at Georgetown University, all of which has greatly informed his work, as you will hear from him shortly. He studied and practiced the world's religions, both Eastern and Western, and in his search for truth, which has led him to the conclusion that the spark of the divine exists in all human beings. He's been committed to the refugee community. Now, these are the words on the paper, but he has lived this with us, the RSC. He has been committed to the refugee community and refugee issues for many years, and has been a longtime supporter of Amnesty International and Doctors Without Borders, and an ardent activist for peace. David lives in Lakewood with his wife, Mary Ann, who, through my work with the RSC, has become a good friend of mine. And they are the proud parents of Lauren, an award-winning ceramic sculptor who resides in Philadelphia, and Jesse, a successful entrepreneur currently living in Los Angeles. So I'm lucky today to have that honor to get to introduce David, and David's going to take us from here. And this, we started a little bit late, so we're running a little behind on our schedule. So this wonderful panel presentation will go to the end. I'll come back up here for 30 seconds at the end, but from here until we wrap up, David's in charge. So thank you. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, Janice, very much. I appreciate that. I wonder if you come home with me and tell my wife about all those things. So I get some kudos with her. But, I appreciate these kind words. I'm very honored to be here, and of course with this panel we'll be able to ask some tough questions about what's going on with immigration and refugees. However, perhaps it's better for them to introduce themselves. So if you wouldn't mind, we'll start here and move our way over from right to left, stage right to left. Your right to left. Your turn.
Good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? My name is Christine Foote, and I'm from the Lakewood City School District, and I work there as a coordinator of teaching and learning. And part of my role is to help refugees from the time they enroll and help with translation services, with documents, as well as transcripts through their graduation from the district, and look at services they receive not only during the school day with academics, but also in the evening with some of the evening programs we have, and also the summer programs that we have there as well. And the other part of my job is essentially all things literacy. So I also work mostly at the secondary level with our English language arts teachers and our history teachers as well.
Hello everyone, thank you for coming out today. My name is Hillary Lucas and I work with Catholic Charities Migration and Refugee Services. I'm a program administrator for our employment program that lasts the first 6 months of a refugee's arrival. And I also work with Andy, who just did the Refugee 101 with volunteer coordination and mentor organization, and also parish outreach.
Everyone, thank you very much for staying attend now. Everyone knows me already, Thomas Kate, working with the Refugee Response since I got here.
Good evening. Thanks for everyone being here. My name is Jason Cheek. I'm a registered nurse at Neighborhood Family Practice. Been a nurse for coming on 22 years. I've been at Neighborhood Family Practice for the last 9. The program was not there when I started in 2009, and as University Hospital was shutting their doors, we had Dr. Kate Conway that came as a new doctor to our practice that brought this program, and she introduced it to Neighborhood Family Practice of this refugee health screening. I worked at Metro for 10 years before this and probably took care of refugees and had no idea. Growing up just south of Cleveland, had no idea this was going on. So it's been an experience. With the program we started, just a standard health screenings that's contracted through the federal government to see newly resettled refugees within 30 days. We've become very unique. We're a federally qualified health center. If you've ever heard of Neighborhood Family Practice, they had 40 plus years ago, they saw that the old family doctors, primary care was becoming more difficult to access on the western side. So that was our roots of getting care to people that either didn't have insurance, had lost access to primary care and preventative care. So taking on the refugee program was I mean, it's kind of what we do. So since then, our model is very unique. We've met with all this screening sites in Ohio that do just the intake refugee screenings. We're primary care. They stay with us. We have a retention rate of like 90% of refugees come back. So that's our gift, that we've built relationships over the last 9 years with these families. So it's been an honor, and I still love my job here at Neighborhood Family Practice and working with all the resettlement agencies.
So I'll begin with the first question, which will be for Hillary and then Thomas. It's the same question, which is fairly loaded. Do refugees want to become citizens?
Well, I would say overwhelmingly yes. Every refugee that I've encountered in 4 years of working with Catholic Charities has wanted to become a citizen after being a refugee, because their experience of being stateless, of not having a place to call home, is very traumatizing. And finally moving to this third country and living here for 5 years before they become a citizen is a struggle. So to have that piece of paper that identifies them with the country again, and to have the rights that come along with it, are just such a valuable thing for a person to have.
Yes, to answer the question, I can say yes, absolutely, because all the refugees, especially our community, Burmese or Korean, we were stateless for many years. After, when we see the picture before, after our house burned down, we flee to another country, we were stateless. We were in refugee camp in Thailand. Thailand in 1951, the UN protocol, they decided to accept refugee fully. So we just live in Thailand as temporary shelter. So we never got to practice our right, for example, to travel outside the refugee camp, to go to higher education. So we were still like, but when we got here, we were very happy and eager to apply to become citizens, so we can travel, we can practice our right.
Cleveland's famous for its resources and for helping with the refugee community. Can you tell me what resources exist for the people to become citizens, Hillary and Thomas?
Sure. So at Catholic Charities, we have an immigration and legal services department. They offer low-cost or fee-waived services for those that are applying for green card or those that are continuing all the way through to citizenship. And our immigration team does a great job of following them through from that initial resettlement. They're referred to immigration legal services. They continue through the green card process and then finish with citizenship. And they're helped with the applications, help with getting their physical exams for those applications, and then finally they're prepared for the test through our English language classes. So the English classes can offer targeted vocabulary that they'll find on their tests, practice for those that are close to taking their exam, and many other supportive services just through our agency.
Yeah, to answer this question, I think we can start with the individual, like the students, professional, doctor, or anyone who has the time to work with the agency, volunteer then, and work with the refugee one-on-one to study English, to practice face-to-face interview. This is the first step that refugee can prepare for citizenship. So another organization like Catholic Charity, Building Hope, the city of Cleveland, also provide the services to help refugee application process. But like I mentioned, it's very important for the refugee to practice their English.
We heard about the reduction in the number of refugees who are being allowed into the country, almost 25% remaining to be coming in, 75% have been cut. And we only have about 90 days to work with people to try to get them into full reclamation into this country. Has the budget also been cut for those services? Have you found less accommodation to try to make those 90 days work? Hillary, please.
Yes, absolutely. So the reduction in the amount of refugees that were allowed into the country caused a trickle-down effect to the agencies. So several agencies across the country had to close. So they're no longer doing resettlement services. They may not have also had extended services for those outside of the 90-day period. So the program is closed entirely. We then have absorbed some other secondary migrants coming into Cleveland where their services may have been closed in the state where they originally resettled, and they're now coming to Cleveland seeking supportive services. We've noticed a reduction in staff as well. We used to have 5 case managers working in the 90-day period, and we now have 2. We were able to absorb those other staff into other areas because we're very blessed to have extended programming up through 5 years. So Catholic Charities has seen a big restructuring. Our clients have felt the tension of services being stretched to their limits, and also federal funding is not as readily available as it once was. So we're looking at more difficult grant cycles. We recently applied for a grant to support parish outreach and education to the community this January, and we have yet to hear back and have been told that the funding is still on hold in a federal process. So we're feeling a lot of strain, but still trying to provide quality service and timely services to those in need. So volunteers are really a backbone, especially now as our staff is stretched thin.
I'm going to shift to Jason now with regard to healthcare, so feel free to elaborate. But with war and violence continuing in all these countries around the world, and the refugees being in camps for 16 years or more, sometimes 20 years in camps, there must be some health disparities that take place. People are sick, or they're suffering from mental health issues or from trauma. How do we here in Cleveland have the facilities to work with those refugees in those rather extreme situations?
So part of Neighborhoods Family Practice's role, we contract with the federal government for doing the refugee health screenings. And that's just that's the beginning stage. We have provide the primary care. When I started at Neighborhood Family Practice in 2009, we probably had maybe 3 behavioral health therapists. I'll come back to that. But with health disparities, as long as wars go on and civil unrest, it's like if you have a fractured healthcare system, what we have in our community is unbelievable. I mean, to go into like Syria, they're pretty westernized, but how long did their hospitals last as the wars took out hospitals? You couldn't go to a hospital. I mean, I have stories of Syrians that was just heart-wrenching. But so we've always seen health disparities as people have come over. We get people plugged in with primary care. Behavioral health came more to our focus a few years back, and we started screening. It's called the RHS 15. It's culturally working with people from all different walks of life and cultures. I mean, America's very blessed we're advanced with accepting behavioral health, but there's still huge stigmatisms on it. I mean, our system can be a ton stronger. And I've been in the field for 20-some years, and talking to folks that have been in for 50 years, it's like, it's way better than it was 50 years ago, but it still needs to be 10 times better. So we've grown our behavioral health departments to serve refugees in the community. This RHS 15, a lot of cultures don't understand. They're very against saying, I'm depressed or I'm anxious. So we use physical somatic symptoms of headaches, back pain, not sleeping well, recurring thoughts. We have interpreters that read it. If a patient can't read it in their language, we have interpreters that will read it to them to answer like 0 to 10. And it's what we've seen. There's a honeymoon phase. The first 90 days, we get so many negative RHS 15s. Everyone has undergone trauma. When there's an acute need in the first meeting, we can soft hand off to our behavioral health to say, all right, are you suicidal? Or let's get you plugged into seeing a therapist or start a medication. As we establish that primary care role, as people's lives kind of settle down, and okay, I'm not sleeping very well. I'm like, I don't want to go to work. It's like those feelings are coming out that we're seeing these folks as long as they're coming back, that we can guide them into our behavioral health services. If it's beyond our services, we're partnered with Cleveland Clinic, Metro, University, that we can find. If we can't do it, we can find someplace for you to go to get help.
The language problem and cultural problem must be large when we deal with different religions, a different way people react between the sexes and between trauma that happens to them. I'm sure that's a very complicated problem. Do we have any attempts at solutions for those kind of barriers?
Patience and learning. Our office is pretty good with cultural competencies. We have every 2 times a month, or twice every, let me get this. Every other month we meet, and we're given an opportunity with our refugee team to present and just keep people abreast of cultural differences. It is a learning process. I think we've gotten better and better the longer we've worked with refugees. We have two cultural navigators, one Nepali, her name's Muna, and one Arabic-speaking patient. Or she was a patient. She became an interpreter for us, a cultural navigator. So that's what we're trying. I look forward to the day of seeing someone that we resettled, a kid in 2010 that's made it through college and becomes a nurse or a doctor, them coming back and working with us. It's a long goal. I know there's going to be people coming back. We're seeing some of the refugees that have been here. I mean, like Lydia, she's already working with healthcare, and I've known people here for 5 years that are getting into home health aides and that. So long term, it's going to get better. In Cleveland, we have it easy. Our system's not perfect, but nationally, when a refugee is screened at a health center, public health department, and then go find a primary care doctor, go find a cardiologist, and their services cut in 90 days. We have a very strong model here. I'm very proud to be a part of it.
Thank you very much. Christine, you're not off the hook, okay? What education do refugees have as they access the United States? How do most refugees find connecting to education in Cleveland with regard to GED, public education, English as a second language? Could you elaborate?
Certainly. I'd like to attack the question on two angles. First of all, the K through 12 end, and then I'll speak to the 18 years and above. So first of all, in Lakewood City Schools, we're honored to serve just over 350 English learners, and roughly 150 of them are refugee students. In the Cleveland Newcomers Academy, they have around 230 refugee students, but in the totality of their building, which is also, by the way, K-12, they have around 530 total English learners. And as Andy mentioned, those are kind of the two places where refugees on the near west side are settled. Our numbers in Lakewood have gone down over the years. We used to have more like 600 to 650 students. And as I mentioned, we currently have around 350, and that is K-12. Related to all of that, there are several barriers that an English learner or refugee faces, especially if they come to our district or really anywhere in America later in their schooling life. So for example, a high schooler with all of the graduation requirements, and just think about the depth of the content. So if you're sitting in algebra class and you just arrived in America last week, think of just the depth of the knowledge that an Algebra 1 student who's 15, 16 needs to have. So that's a huge barrier, and support services such as Refugee Response that's here tonight as part of the RSC, they help with tutoring at home at night in the families and working with the students, as well as Asia Inc. that's part of the RSC and the work that they do in the evening with programming at Emerson Elementary in Lakewood, as well as in the summer. So the RSC really has a great partnership with these different entities in Cleveland and in Lakewood. The other barrier to keep in mind that Andy mentioned too, and also Thomas, generally in refugee camps, there isn't an established educational system. Refugees have to move to flee for safety, so they're not in a set educational program with set curriculum, what have you. So that creates barriers then when they do settle here in Lakewood or in Cleveland, because they've had interrupted schooling and the depth of knowledge and understanding isn't there. On the second end of this is if you come to America and you're 18 or older, Tri-C does have a program in Lakewood. It was set there because many of the refugees settle in the Lakewood area, as you heard. So they have the Aspire program there that is currently helping 500 refugees 18 years and older. And they have 3 different programs that are throughout the city. And one of them is with Building Hope in the city as well. So again, the RSC is helping with all of that together. So there's the Tri-C program, that is the Aspire program. They also have, it's like a GED, but essentially it turns out where the refugees in the program that are adults can pass the test to get a high school diploma. But it's not actually the GED, but it's very similar. The GED is just the test. The other piece of this is that many refugees, they are highly educated, but when they come to America, the credentials don't transfer. So they may have been doctors, nurses, teachers, lawyers, what have you in their country of origin, but when they are here, it doesn't transfer. So Tri-C has several different programs, such as a nursing program that leads eventually to becoming a nurse and eventually to becoming a doctor. Also some teaching programs that, again, it doesn't land you a teaching certificate, but it allows them to be a paraprofessional. So again, down the road, they can get back into education. They also have a hospitality program that's offered and an automotive program. So those are some different venues and options that are available. The English as a second language course, the one I mentioned that's housed in Lakewood, that one is free of charge. It's grant funded. But of course, there's a need there, and they often have a wait list because there's so many students that want to take part in that. So the bottom line is that the refugee educational landscape here in Lakewood and Cleveland is an intricately woven tapestry. And the RSC are the different pieces, such as Tri-City, such as Refugee Response, Lakewood City Schools, Cleveland Metropolitan Schools. We all have little pieces in that tapestry that create the beauty of the whole.
Thank you. Thomas, as a refugee who's lived in Cleveland for a while, how do you see refugees impacting the area in a positive way or a negative way or an economic way?
I can say two things. First one is the economic growth. Almost 95% of the refugees, whenever they came from, they are really hardworking, because when we came here, we have a passion that we want to build our family here. We want to build American dream. So anyone get here, they get a job. And like I say, 95% of refugees get into entry-level job. Even some of them, they are professional, they are doctor, nurse in their country, but they cannot apply in here when they got. So we have to start working. I have a friend who are a doctor, but have to drive taxi first in Cleveland here. So we start this job here, and like Andy mentioned about, we see 2.7 million tax collected by the refugee worker, and 663 the new career. So refugee families, some of the refugees just got here, get a job, and also provide a job. Some of them open a restaurant, have their own grocery store, and not only the refugee get a job, and also provide a job to the local non-refugee here to work with us. For example, Refugee Response, we have the farmer who work at the Ohio City farm, but we need a person who to manage the farm, who can speak English and who have experience here. So we hire the local people, the manager for the local people here. So not only refugees get a job, and there is a positive impact. Also, on educational perspective, for example, we share the technique of work. Refugees around the world bring their own technique for working at the farm or working others at the industry. We share this kind of technique, and also we share the knowledge among refugees around the world. And we expect, especially the acceptance of community toward cultural diversity. People have different culture, but we accept everyone. Like I mentioned before, in Lakewood, there's a lot of cultural diversity, but we celebrate it together. So this is the good positive impact of the refugee in Northeast Ohio here.
Thank you. For those of you who do not know, that the Refugee Response Farm on 25th Street is the largest urban farm in America and has wonderful organically grown foods and things which you probably eat in all the restaurants around here as well. So make sure you get down there and try some of that honey. It's really wonderful. If there are any questions, we'll be happy to entertain questions, or if Janice is here, would like to close, we can certainly do that. Yes, please.
So I know that the schools actually are the cutoff at 21. So by your 21st birthday, you have to be finished with your 12th year of high school and prepared to take that graduation test. When they come through Catholic Charities, we say you're an 18-year-old, you're an independent adult, and you're also an income earner for your family. So we're encouraging 18-year-olds to make the decision to either work or go to school or do both. The enrollment process is their own initiative after 18 because we're only able to help minors with applications for school. But we do provide them with connections to the high schools in the area and connect them with the refugee coordinator on site, like at Thomas Jefferson. They're not denied any services through Catholic Charities. They still receive employment and benefit support and housing assistance. Was that clarification? Do you have another question? Okay, so there's an employment program called Match Grant, and if you're 18 or older, you're considered an employable adult, and as an employable adult, you can receive benefits, cash assistance and rental assistance for 3 months, and we also assist you with employment services up to 6 months, so connecting you with employers and then following up to make sure that there's job retention. So as an 18-year-old, you're allowed to make the decision if you choose to be an employable member of your family, so that means you're willing to work. If you choose not to work, then you are still allowed the services of the cash assistance and the rental assistance. You're just saying, I don't want to work. So you're not penalized, you're just not receiving the employment services because you're electing to go to school instead. But if they come back and change their mind and want to work part-time and go to school or decide school is not the best route for them, there is employment services through that program and additional programming for them. So not a penalization, just a different route, I suppose.
Any other questions? No, if not, Janice, I'll turn it back over to you for the closing remarks.
So sincere thanks to David and to all of our panelists, to Lydia, to Thomas, to all of our presenters today. We hope you all learned something new. I learned a lot new about refugees as our neighbors here in Cleveland. So a couple sentences here. Sincere thanks to the Community West Foundation for their sponsorship of so much of the work that the RSC does here in Cleveland, and to Dean Englund and everybody here, Aaron from CSU, special thanks there for making this all possible and so beautifully pulling this all together. On the table over there, you have them now, great. Of all the tables over there, there is information on the Refugee Services Collaborative. Please take some and look at the website of the Refugee Services Collaborative. There's a wide variety of types of volunteer opportunities if you're interested or know anybody that is. And if you're involved with a community group of any type, a church, a synagogue, a mosque, a Rotary Club, a school group, where you would like a presentation about refugees in our community, let us know. RSC members are very happy to do that. And again, sincere thanks to all of our panelists and presenters today. Thank you all very, very much.